Here to talk about Azure's Open AI, and I can tell the story as to why a little bit. So, most of you have been to the group before. As you all know, every second Tuesday we're trying to do meetups, and we're asking people in the community to speak about anything around Azure, right? So, also a reminder, if you'd like to speak about a topic, please let us know as the organizers, and we'll make that happen. We had someone signed up to speak today for like 3 months. His name is Sawyer. He's a Microsoft, I think, solutions architect on the Microsoft team. And he was going to talk about Synapse, I think, from a data standpoint. And about 3 weeks ago, he emailed me and said, "Hey, I'm really sorry. Something came up. I can't do it on that day. I'll do it later in the year." And I said, "No problem. We'll find someone." So a week and a half went by. I reached out to a bunch of people, and no one said anything. So I'm filling in. And what that means is this is a little bit last minute. It's not exactly going to be as polished as a presentation as I gave last time. And it's not necessarily my first choice either. In fact, I'm hoping that this will be the last time you'll have to have me do the speaking. I'd rather just be on the organizing side of things. But I'd still like the meetings to happen. I think it's important to have the cadence, to have the meetings every Tuesday or every second Tuesday of the month. So this is a follow-up to the session we had at Spartan Innovations downtown last month. Most of you were there. We talked about build and all the announcements and the latest things that Azure was going to showcase. And there was a lot of interest around this specific topic to kind of dive in around OpenAI, around building your own chatbot experience and maybe connecting it to your own organization's data. So that's where the idea came from. It really was all about kind of, let's see what this stuff looks like. Let's see it in action. So I have a demo worked up. In theory, it's going to work just fine, and hopefully you can learn a little bit about this. But before I really start, has anyone in the audience worked with this technology yet? Anyone actually spun up their own AI resource? Awesome. Do you like it so far? Yeah, I'm pretty impressed. I mean, it's still like private preview for some of the things in preview, and it's not quite all GA, but it's actually fairly quick to get up and running. So cool. Okay. If I have any questions, I'm going to ask you in the back. All right. So that's a little bit of the setup. Oh, logistics for if you're here. When you walk through this hallway, right around the back is the restrooms in case you need it. You can go right around this back hallway or out through the way you came. If you find the R2D2 sticker, that is where the men's room is. So you can use that if you need to. If you need Wi-Fi throughout any of this, there's a sign on the window there, or right up here, it's the blue signs that's got the password to the guest Wi-Fi. If you need anything to drink, that fridge is open game. There's a little bit of soda, a little bit of other things, and a couple beers in there. And there's a water dispenser right there too. I don't know if the glasses made it out or not, but so yeah. So logistics, I think we're set. This is meant to be a learning session for everybody. So if you have any questions, please just interrupt me, and we'll answer them. We'll go through it, and I'm going to show you basically how to use Azure's new Open AI. Make sense? Fantastic. All right, so I'm going to come over here. So this is ultimately what we're going to try to build today. What happens with OpenAI is it gives you, number one, a playground to connect and test to large language model deployments that you can provision through Azure. It also gives you a nice way to deploy those sort of playgrounds to a real app that then has a chat interface that can be secured with your Azure AD with very little effort, and basically a demo app for how you could use this organization. So I thought I'd start with, that's our target. We're trying to build this, because this basically is just like Chat GPT or other chat things you've seen. Some of the things we reviewed last month, right, in the session. And I'm going to walk through how to do that. It starts with what's called Azure AI Studio. Azure AI Studio right now is, I believe, a free resource that you can gain access to kind of like rapid prototype the ideas of what Microsoft's version of OpenAI is going to give you. So it's got a couple playgrounds as we see here on the screenshot. The one we're going to use a lot today is the chat playground, but I thought we might also have a little fun with the DALL-E playground because it's fun to generate AI-based images. It's amazing what kind of things it makes. So from a slide standpoint, I'm going to dive right in at that point. But Azure AI Studio is where we're going. The thing I don't remember for a while you had to like sign up for it at a link, and then they would grant you access if you met certain criteria. You still do? Okay, so yeah, okay, so that's still there. Pretty soon, I think they're going to open it up to everybody. But if you're curious about how to get to this, you can ask a question in the chat. We can send out a link or something. But it wasn't too hard for me to get in, but you did have to fill out the form. Okay, so with that, this is going to be interesting because now what I want to do, yeah, internet issues, fun, is duplicate my screen so I can actually see everything that you guys are seeing. So give me a second to do that. Come on. All right, looks like you guys are still seeing that, so that's good. Yes, I want to keep the changes. And let's pop into browser world. Okay. So, as I said, we'll start out with Azure AI Studio, and we'll blank screen. Oh, I wonder if I have to reshare. I'm just going to quick possibly reshare. Share the whole screen. Thank you, Matt. I'm hoping that that fixes that. Okay. So Azure AI Studio, we're going to start with the fun one that is doesn't take much to understand. But basically, DALL-E as a playground is a way for you to test your Azure AI resource by passing a phrase of text to a model that will basically generate images. So they're actually even starting out with an example. The phrase or the prompt is a multicolored umbrella on the beach, comma, disposable camera. Not the greatest prompt in the world, but you can see it's giving you a couple preview images. And again, this one's really basic, but I've had a lot of fun with like a glass of red wine. You can actually type that in, click generate, and it takes a second, but basically it will generate an image that represents that prompt. So very basic. What gets a little bit more interesting is you can actually say like a glass of red wine sitting on a wood table outside at a park, right? So the more descriptive you actually become with the prompt, typically the better image you're going to get out of the system. And there we go. So we now have a glass of red wine sitting on a table outside of the park. That's pretty cool. In our world, when we build a lot of marketing sites that we build, there's a lot of articles and you need background images or thumbnail images to represent the article concept. This is a great way to do that. Now, obviously, you wouldn't nearly use the playground to do that, but say you had to build this type of service into your applications, this actually kind of gives you the code of what's actually happening behind the scenes to generate that image. And this is a Python script by default, but it does have basically a raw REST API style interface to the resource to do that as well. But this is kind of some of the possibilities of the OpenAI system. This is still the same OpenAI system as like the actual DALL-E system that you would get through OpenAI.com, but now you're running it through Microsoft Azure's world, so you can have like your security and your AI responsibility affect it a little bit. You can also have it generate different sized. Sorry, that's the wrong button. Remove that. It's in the settings. You can have it generate different sized images, and you can actually have it generate multiple images at a time. So I can generate 3 new images if I don't like that one that it just made, and it will do that. Now, the more you generate, the longer it does take, but you can kind of see you can get some pretty cool variants pretty quickly of just random things. And my staff loves it when I use this tool for our internal presentations. So I did a presentation last Monday for the staff here in this room around one of our values of being a team. So of course I went into this to generate pictures and said, you know, a group of people celebrating a team win. And literally, I think I did that exact prompt to see what this would do as a way to put it on my slides for the presentation. And sometimes it's not really close. Like this person right here doesn't really have all their limbs, it looks like, potentially. And if you keep going, you know, the more you get into like human type generation, the worse it gets. So like, yeah, that guy in the middle, something's going on with the face there a little bit. Usually the hands are a challenge for these systems as well, but you get the idea. You can generate things quickly, and if you want to do that programmatically through code, you've got some samples on how to do it, and the potential again is there. But it works by passing the prompt and the REST API to the actual AI resource that you have on your Azure subscription. So I want to show that next, because that's not quite AI Studio. That is more pure Azure. So actually, it's not this one. It's this one. So what I've done is provision an Azure Open AI resource type in Azure. And that is the type of resource you need to start all of these things. It's the actual real sort of REST API endpoint that all the code, all the samples, all the playgrounds, they all point to. And this is basically the thing you need to have to get this working. Now, this resource type is not available around the world yet. It's not in all of the regions. It's, I think, only in East and a couple others around the States. And it's not activated for every kind of subscription. So again, hopefully you would have access to this if you want to do this after this session. But if not, you may have to play around with where you actually provision the resource in, and is your account allowed to do it? Maybe you need to talk to your administrator and things like that. But so just like any other thing in Azure, you have to spin up this resource first. From here, you control the standard things you would in Azure. So you would have your endpoint name, your keys. I'm not going to show the keys, but that's where this starts. And also, they've recently updated this to talk about pricing. Before it was kind of like, we're not sure what pricing is yet. Try that again. And it looks like they still might not even be sure, or it's just taking a while to load in. Or it's done. We'll get to that. There is a metric around that, but it's also on your deployments. So I'll show that in a second. I'm surprised that that's actually not doing more. All right, well, there is a price. We can end on that if there's time to. Oops, didn't mean to do that. Okay, so you spin up this resource. That then gives you the first link to explore and use OpenAI Studio, which you simply click that, and it bounces you back to the studio. So that's where I started. So you spin up the resource, and then you can use it in all the other things. One of them is the studio, one of them is your code, all that fun stuff. What the rest of the demo is going to be about, though, is really the chat playground and how you can use the playground. So this is a little bit more of an advanced interface, right? It's not just the one text input or prompt for your chat session. It actually starts on the left with an assistant setup, the session in the middle, and then some parameters of how you can actually fine-tune the way the chatbot responds and interacts with things. There's actually quite a few parameters. This talk, I'm not going to go into them a ton because I don't think there's time. But just know that this is, ways to make the large language model processing happen in different ways. Shorten things, lengthen things, do various things with it. Again, it's not the meat of what I want to get to. We'll come back to that if there's time. So the chat system needs to have a model to do the processing and the chatting, basically. And that model is actually called a deployment. Well, so you make a deployment of the model. And if you have multiple deployments, this will be a list of them, but you need to pick what kind of large language model you want to provision, and then you need to deploy it in this part of the management aspect of Azure AI Studio. So I have two deployments, two models, basically. I have one GPT 3.5 Turbo, and then I have one DaVinci 003. And they're meant for different things. And when you first start in Studio, this is going to be empty. There won't be anything there for you. You'll have to create or click create a new deployment, and it kind of walks you through a little bit of here are all of the possible models, the base models, because you can even get more advanced and make your own models. I haven't done any of that by any means, but you'll see some things if you're somewhat familiar with some of these models. You know, GPT 3.5, Turbo. I think the 4 model is coming, but not out yet to everyone. And really, this is you. My recommendation: start with the 3.5 Turbo. It's probably the one that's closest to what you're used to if you're using, you know, the Chat GPT systems, and it's great for just questions and answers. And that's kind of what we're trying to build, right? We're trying to build a question and answer bot. So you would give it a name. I just called mine, you know, Dash Turbo, so I knew which one it was to have a unique name. The name doesn't matter; it just has to basically be unique. And I provisioned that, and I'm not going to do it again because it actually takes some time. So that's the model that all the questions and answers are going to be fed to and sourced from, basically. Once you have that, and since I basically have one that really matters, it selects it for you in the deployment, and then you have a way to chat. So I can say, you know, what kind of company is Microsoft? And it's going to basically use the knowledge it has trained in that model. Common things for what we're used to when using the Q&A bots, right? Or the assistants. And it's using its data so far, which is important because if I say, as we saw I think last month, what happened at Microsoft Build 2023, what's it going to say? It's going to basically say, I can't do that because I don't have information past the, was it 2021 deadline that all these models were trained on, okay? And it's not going to have information about, say, your company policies or the data set you're trying to bring into your chat, right? So if I ask it like, what kind of benefits that does Bitstream offer, it's basically not going to be able to answer that either. Or it's going to try. I'm actually surprised. It must have. This must have been. I mean, our website probably has an HR or careers page and probably has some of this information on there. But you know, is that accurate? Is it updated to what we have as of today? Probably not. Although actually, it's actually pretty close. But at a very high level, no specific answers in that question, right? Yes, we have benefits, and yes, we have a retirement plan. But actually, it's probably actually, yeah, we have a 401k. So it can do some answers that it knows, right? But what I said last month and why this is somewhat interesting is not just what the large language model has. It's also about maybe marrying it with your data, right? And bringing together information that you want to merge into the data set or maybe even like replace the data set. And that's where I was first impressed with this technology. It really was around the add your own data button. And that's the thing. I don't know what that alert was, but that's the thing that allows you to very quickly prototype and put together information you have stored in Azure to the large language model processing. So you can start asking it very specific questions. And I have some information set up for that. So I'm going to do that. And I'm going to add a data source that's going to walk me through a little bit of a wizard here to say, all right, here are a couple kinds of information stores that OpenAI knows about. Are you going to try to use an Azure Cognitive Search Index? Are you going to try to use Azure Blob Storage? Are you going to try to upload files like a set of PDFs? And eventually, I think even the private version of this has like Cosmos DB as one of the sources that it can actually search. So for today's demo, I'm going to use Azure Cognitive Search because I actually have some search indexes already set up. And what the search index does is basically allow you to search other sources that you've indexed through this Azure Cognitive Search tool. And for our example, I have a search index that looks at all the content on my website. So this is my personal blog. I've got lots of blog posts that have lots of words and answers about the topics that I talk about, mainly being Kentico CMS and Content CMS, and even a little bit of Microsoft Azure is on there. And I've got about 200 blogs. And if I search that, I can use Azure Search to search by the tag that the blog post is tagged. Standard like techie blog search, right? So I can ask it about like marketing automation in Kentico or whatever, and it's going to bring back results, right? So this is the search index that I'm going to connect to the Azure Open AI large language model. Does that make sense so far? Okay. All right. So a little bit about that search index before I do the connection. This is an Azure Search resource. It has indexes that represent the types of things that you want to search, or the types of things that are stored that you want to get the AI to have access to. So I have one index called all content for all blog post content. Maybe not the best name in the world, but that's what I went with. And I wanted to show this screen. And I know it might be a little small, but a search index is a lot like a database table in a way. It's a schema format for the types of information you have captured in the index that you want to search upon. So Kentico is a CMS. It has a lot of fields available to it. A lot of them are nothing that you'd want to search, and some of them are things you want to. So the first set of checkboxes here are basically telling the search index what should be retrievable as results when I search, and what should be filtered and sorted and faceted and all that stuff. Doesn't matter for the rest of this conversation. But basically I'm telling it that like the way the blog posts are tagged, that blue check mark means I want that to be searchable and be able to bring results back through that. I also have like the culture that this is an English document. I have things like the name of the document or the blog post title. And you can see it's kind of all set up for, and actually importantly, like summary. The summary is the short description that you saw right here. So this is the summary. I want that to be searched when you do this. So I've defined all that ahead of time because I use that on my blog. And that index then contains 267 search documents, or really, in my case, 267 blog posts. And if you want to test it in Azure Search, you can do the same thing. You can actually like test that same search I was just doing, marketing automation, hit search, and this is the raw JSON response. Here's an article with this path to it. It's tagged marketing automation. That's probably why it came back as one of the results. The name of the blog post is Kentico 8 marketing automation snippets. And then there's the summary and then the image for the search result. So it's a very JSON structured document that you can now use in many ways because it's just another API endpoint. All right. So I went through all that to basically get us back to here, because this is asking us which thing in Azure Search do we want to merge with our large language model. So you're going to have a subscription. I'm going to choose, actually I need to choose the subscription that it's in. And it's saying, okay, what search service do you want to search on? So I have one in that subscription. That's the demo of my website content search service. And then in a service, you can have multiple indexes. There's the all content index. And now I've basically said, here's the data source that I want to use to do this. And I'm going to acknowledge that, yes, I have an Azure Search account and it's going to cost some money. That's fine. All right. Now, after picking that as a data source, we have to tell it, okay, where is the content that you might use in a question and answer scenario? So it's basically looking through all the fields I showed you before, all those blue checkmark fields. And now it's saying, okay, here are the ones I think that the content would be searchable in. So I'm just going to do name and summary right now. So make it easy. And then it's expecting in this playground that these are like file results. I think the real intention is that it's a like a set of PDFs that you might be referencing to bring back. If you think back to my presentation from last month, the reference thing, most of them are PDFs. So that's why it's asking for a file name. This is mainly just for uh, this playground. It doesn't matter in our example, so I'm not going to worry about it too much. Really, the key thing would be the name. You want the name to line up to the title because that's what it's going to report back to the user. This is the reference or the footnote that I found this answer in. And then the URL, you would have a URL field in the index that you would pick from. I actually don't have that in my index. So I'm just picking a name. It doesn't really matter. And that's would map our fields. From there, it's recommended that you actually enable semantic search in your Azure Search Index. I just haven't done that because my blog code doesn't need that. But in a more advanced real world scenario, the semantic search is a better way to handle search results. It's more accurate. So you would pick your configuration. I'm going to skip that for today's demo. And then you're going to review everything. And that's about it, right? So you're basically configuring now. It's called grounding. We're grounding our data set with the large language model. And it by default says, I want to limit responses to the data content that I've added into this setup. Okay? And it gives us a little preview that here's the things that are connected. It starts up a new chat session by showing this message because we can't reuse the other session. It kind of throws that state away and starts up a new session. And now, when I ask it things like, what is content.ai, which is a topic that my blog has quite a bit about, it's giving me an answer. Content.ai is a company that provides CMS, and unfortunately I couldn't find more. All right, that's an interesting response. Usually it doesn't do that. Because it found at least 5 references that named content.ai in the blog post article. So it's actually referencing them that, this is an actual blog post about one of my podcasts talking about content.ai's new CEO. And this is basically the basics of setting up the model to use your data versus just what it knows. And if we don't limit the response, it can optionally use some of that data or not. So I can ask it the same question. And now it's going to pull from what it knows. In theory, it should pull what it knows, but actually it looks like it used my stuff again. Interesting. Maybe it's because I didn't completely clear the chat. Let me try that again. Or, well, maybe I did do that. I'll try one more time. As I said, it's a playground. It's not meant for speed. And depending on how fast it's going, it's going to give you an answer. Have you done this before with setting up your own data into the playground? Yeah. Okay. Have you done it through like the SDK or the API or anything like that? Okay. Sure, that's fine. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Yep. Okay, cool. Yep, many ways to do this stuff. It's still going. I don't really know why. I'll tell you what, I'm going to keep going though, and I'm going to show you one other thing about this that's important. The assistant setup is also a tab here on the left on the playground. And what it allows you to do is kind of tweak the system message or one of the system prompts that tells the chatbot in what kind of behavior to respond to you in. So if I just do a regular question about like when was Microsoft founded, we have, all right, I'm going to disconnect that data source a second so I can prove this point. When was Microsoft founded? You got me an answer right away, but it was a very straightforward answer, right? A very factual, matter-of-fact answer. The system message kind of allows you to control that a little bit, and they give you a couple templates for here's kind of a way to influence the style that the response is given. So if I change it to be a marketing writing assistant, and you can actually put in a fairly detailed like description of how you want that marketing writing assistant to behave. So in this case, we're saying, help me come up with more creative content in a very long way. And if you don't know what to say, you can actually control how it says, I don't know the answer. So one of the things I saw someone do is basically instead of just like the standard English response, like say the word salsa, to really like hone in that like you're controlling the behavior of the assistant. And now that I've changed that, it actually wants me to save it, so I'm going to do that. So we're going to do the same thing. When was Microsoft founded? Okay, well, we lost the word corporation in the response. Not very creative. Can you be a little bit more creative in your response? There we go. That's actually what I thought it was going to do. So, born in a garage in Albuquerque, a little bit more creative, right? Because we're telling it to try to be that marketing writing person, not just the matter of fact, yes, this is the really standard boring answer to this question. Better question. So this system message is really important to allowing it to or allowing you as a developer to control the style in which the prompts are working in your application, right? If you're a customer support app, maybe you want it to be kind of nice and friendly and engaging versus just a website search with I'm looking for the answer as fast as possible. So that's really what that system message kind of lets you do. And then just to prove the salsa thing, let's ask it what happened at Microsoft Build 2023. Say the word salsa, right? It didn't give us the whole, I'm sorry, I can't figure this out type of answer. So it's kind of a cool way to control that. And you can really kind of make it speak about like the way your brand wants to communicate or your app wants to communicate with its customers, right? So that's just one example. You can actually, oh, that was weird. You can make your own things. I haven't played around with too many other ones. I'm afraid of what this one will actually do. So I actually haven't changed this one before, and it looks like it gave me a whole bunch of other types of options. I'll be honest, this one's new to me. But it is very specific on the way that it's trying to set up the assistant. So let's just try this a second. When should I file my taxes? And even though we gave it like a suggestion for how to reply, it did come up with its own answer, which is interesting. Very detailed, very lengthy answer, as an IRS agent would be, right? I didn't change it, the template, so probably not. Okay. Based off time, I'm going to do this, though. I'm going to go back to the standard default. I'm going to clear this. Because here's the other thing. I promised we were going to actually build an application that you can use. This is, again, it's just the playground. And for a while, this is the only, this was the last thing that this tool could do. But what kind of impressed me is in the last month or so, they added this deploy to button. And it says, okay, would you like to deploy this to something more real, like a full web app? So when you click that, it's basically saying, I'll give you a full web application that takes all the code that's running behind the scenes for all this stuff, connected to a GitHub repository, and I'll push that into an Azure App Service that you can then use and control and like use in your organization. It'll have Azure Active Directory already enabled because that's actually pretty standard and easy in Azure. And then you'll be able to use it. So you can deploy it to a new web app, or you can use an existing. You give it a name, a subscription, a resource group, all the normal things you would do. You pick a pricing plan, you'd click the button, and then it would deploy a resource. Now, in the real world, that did take me like 20 minutes to actually get done, and it ended up with this resource. So I'm skipping that for the purposes of this conversation. But basically, it spun up the web app, it connected it to the GitHub repo. It gave me a nice little link to where that repo is. It now lets me have the full control of a web app for if I need to change like the security or the authentication or whatever. I can add a custom domain, but by default, if I just click the default domain of that web app, it made this. And that's the thing that I started with on my slide, right? So this is an actual app. It is secured to AD, and I logged in ahead of time. So just to prove that, if I go to private mode, it should probably ask me to log in. There we go, right? So it'd be secure. It's not just open to the world. And I can actually, and this one I have tied to my data of my blog post, the Azure Cognitive Search way that I showed you in the beginning. So I can ask it things like, what are the Kentco marketing automation capabilities? Okay, it's being a smart aleck. I've asked it this before. So, never fails when you want to do a good demo. How about, what is the Content Rocks podcast? All right, here we go. So, it looked at my blog. Part of my blog is talking about my podcast, and it gave me two references to how it figured out this answer. The Introducing Content Rocks podcast, pretty good source of information, and then one of the more recent ones about composable DXP. So this is something that I could then share with my colleagues and my company. Has authentication. You could tie it to whatever data set you want. Actually, how about this? Tell me about e-commerce features. There we go. So now it's putting together a full paragraph based off of multiple blog posts I have around Kentco and e-commerce. And I thought that that was pretty darn cool for not having to write any code, really just do some configuration. You do have to specify your Azure Open AI keys to be able to make all this work. But I think this could be useful. I think it could be something that you could spin up really quick and test pretty easily in your organization. What do you guys think? Cool, cool. Um, they would. They would had I actually, in my search index, have the full URL. Behind the scenes, I don't because in my own code base, I know how to resolve to mcbeeve.com/blah blah blah. But yeah, generally you populate the index with the full absolute URL. Yeah. 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 So Azure Search can do that. You'd have to use the Azure Search SDK to populate some of the search documents out of the SharePoint search into that. But I think there's an example how to do that on GitHub. Azure Search is a very well-known, established search tool. It's been out there for years. We've used it here for at least 5 or 6 years, so it can do a lot of things actually. The other thing would be if you just want to look at the PDFs in your SharePoint, like an asset library or document library, you can actually put those into a blob storage account in Azure, and then you could point OpenAI at that. You wouldn't have to use a search index. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yep. I think that'd be a great use case for it. Okay. So I have a couple more things, but that was the main demo. Uh-oh. Matt, which screen do you see? Okay. All right. Sorry, give me 1 second to switch that again. All right, now do you see that? Okay, fantastic. Um, there is a completions playground, which is basically like a way to do bulk testing. You can pass it many phrases, it will respond and generate more text, just a little bit more in bulk. And it's really meant for testing. I don't think it's all that interesting, to be honest. I think the chat interface is a lot more interesting. So that's why I didn't want to spend a ton of time on it. Um, the other thing in the playground that's probably worth mentioning is the content filters there at the bottom. The content filters is how you kind of enable that responsible AI stuff that we talked about last month of if I want to tone down the language or the material, you can play with those categories of like violence or sexual terms or there's like 3 or 4 other ones. So that's where you would enable the filters. Sorry, I don't have anything to show you on that other than pointing it out. But this is the pattern name for the thing we just walked through. Microsoft and a few others are calling it retrieval augmented generation, or RAG. And it's where you have your source information on the left, whether it's a database, an Azure Search Index, a set of PDF files, wherever. It's saying search that to find relevant chunks in the middle. And then whether or not you use an Azure Cognitive Search query or you use what's called like vector indexing and vector search to say what are the closest matched terms to the phrase that's being asked. Take that and then marry it in the bottom right with the chat GTP answer. And that's how we're making the conversation happen there in the top or the middle right. So it's kind of, there's papers out there that are describing this pattern more often. And it's kind of nice to see it visually of this is basically how it all worked, the thing that we just did. So that's why I thought I would throw that up there to help explain it. There are ways to sort of customize and do all sorts of different ways to do the RAG pattern, but this is Microsoft's answer to it. I thought that was kind of cool. The other thing that they literally just launched, like I swear, like a week or two ago, is a solution accelerator called Azure Chat GPT. And this is pretty nice because it's yet another example outside of the playground and outside of Azure AI Studio, but it's meant for more of a developer-y type of experience. And it's yet a level up from the basic application we deployed. It actually gives you an app service, stores conversation history, and as Cosmos DB still talks to the OpenAI resource. And in case you didn't know, Azure Active Directory got renamed to Entra, which tomorrow they'll probably come up with a different name for it because that's what they do at Microsoft. I thought I just had it with external identities. I thought I was like, yes, at least I'm calling it that now and not B2C or B2B anymore. But there's stuff they're doing with it. So this solution accelerator is available on GitHub, and it's a full set of code. The link is there in the slide to get to it. And in fact, we have right at time, but we have a minute or so. So let me show you that. It's this. Oh wait, you don't see that. Do that. You see that now. Okay, so this is that Azure Chat GPT repo. The cool thing about this would then be you can fork this and use it however you want, but it basically walks you through the benefits of it. It's private, you control it, you can customize it. All it takes to get set up is basically a set of configuration, It does use some really modern technologies like Next.js, Node, Tailwind. So you can actually like customize the app even. It has a one-click deploy to Azure button, so you can sandbox prototype it using the standard setup. And really, it's editing the environment file where these keys are to the same resources that we walked through today, right? Like the Azure Open AI resource, where GitHub is at, where your Entra/Azure AD client secrets are, and things like that, and the Cosmos DB for the chat history. So basically, it gives you this. Oh, come on. Zoom in a little bit. And you could basically really customize the whole interaction of the screen, right? Where the other one is not going to be as easy. But this was a pretty cool thing that they just launched, which is why I added it. You guys agree? I think that's kind of cool. Yep. Yep. I lost the window. Sorry, almost there. Okay, maybe that. There we go. So that's something I would encourage you to try out if you want to check out this technology. Very cool thing. And honestly, I think that's it. I hope you enjoyed the quick tour of what's possible with Azure Open AI. I'll open the rest of the time to questions, answers, comments. Anybody want to see anything more specific? Thank you.
When you deployed your application, you showed us the web app that was already created and configured. If you were to go back into AI Studio and change your response types, would that then automatically be reflected within the web app?
That is a fantastic question. So for those of you watching remote, the question was, with the deployed app, the app service that I deployed showing the chat interface, which would be this one, if I make changes to my playground, would it automatically go to this? The answer to that is no. Unfortunately, it's like a disconnected copy. So you have the ability then to go back in to the resource, the web app resource, which is going to be here, I hope. Oh, I lost it. Yeah, sorry. Here it is. It's going to be here. And at that point, what it has done is actually spun up a version of this code, the sample app OpenAI Chat GTP, and kind of, in a way, just put in these variables for you as the app configuration, because it probably didn't know about the local file system. And at that point, it's like a copy. Like, so the parameters that I kind of skirted over quickly at the beginning to the playground, it takes those and puts those here and connects up your REST API endpoint to your OpenAI instance. And at that point, you would be editing the copy of code that's in the app. Because if you look back at the studio, one thing I was a little disappointed in is even though I've already done this, my only option is basically deploy a new one. So what you could do though, yes, yes, but you have to be careful because that's a blind overwrite, right? It would overwrite. So if you did make modifications, there's not like a synchronization, I guess, is the main. So it's either make a new one or update one, but basically overwrite. Yes. 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 Yep. Yep. The other thing is that the playground state doesn't always stay there for forever, I've noticed. So it's not like your work is saved. If I come back like that, if I hadn't have removed the data source, I think like the same day it stayed for me, but like a week later it was gone. I had to reconnect it. So it really is meant to be like this playground. And that's why I think like the solution accelerator version is a little bit more like real if you're going to do this for like a real thing for your company. Or there's, I mean, you can just grab samples and SDKs right out of GitHub for directly referencing it and not using these sample apps. You don't have to use the sample apps, is I guess the other point. But that was a good question. Any other questions? Any questions from anyone listening on Teams? All right.
I don't have any questions, but that was really insightful. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. With that, we'll call it. Everyone here, still welcome to hang out, network a little bit. But I will stop the recording and we'll call it a night.